Welcome to Busted Speakers. I'm Ed,
I'm Alex.
And I'm Cam.
and today we're going to be discussing Poppy's third album, I Disagree. It's kind of difficult to go into Poppy's background without acknowledging a pretty crucial aspect of her narrative, which is a very much real lawsuit from a few years back. So I'll speak about that fairly broadly and suggest that anyone listening should definitely research the situation themselves if they're so inclined, because it's such a huge thing to have to discuss here, and we kind of want to focus on the music. But having said that, the lawsuit, which was instigated by essentially Poppy's predecessor, Mars Argo, it accused the Poppy project of being knowingly derivative of Mars Argo and a lot of the ideas that she brought to the table, as well as presenting a good chunk of evidence that Poppy's former collaborator and Mars Argo's former collaborator, Titanic Sinclair, is kind of an abusive tool. But the reason I bring this up is that it could be argued that a lot of the lyrics on I Disagree pertain to how this whole situation developed recently, with Poppy distancing herself and indeed the Poppy character from Titanic, whilst also acknowledging his abusive behaviour in a Facebook post back in December. But yeah, I figured it'd be worth bringing this up as a rough frame of reference, given that I don't feel entirely comfortable giving props to some of Poppy's older YouTube content. That being said, her music is something that very much feels, hers. It's her own. So up until this point, she's largely been releasing electropop and synthpop that occasionally plays into her character, which is basically an artificial internet sensation who perhaps isn't quite human. But I don't know a whole ton about it. I'm kind of just interested in what she's going to be doing musically, especially with this new album, because I'd say this is easily the most concise and worthwhile Poppy album thus far. So, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I like this release a lot. Been listening to it a lot in preparation for this, like 8 times I think.
Damn.
It's got hooks for days, literally for days. I've had the choruses and vocal melodies in this in my head for days. So I'd say, even though it's got quite a lot of metal aspects to this, it definitely feels more of a pop release primarily to me. Definitely straying from singularly just pop like her previous releases were primarily. This is definitely incorporating from metal to heavy industrial to electronic and even some like folk psychedelic elements on a few songs. The metal presence is probably the strongest presence other than the pop. Even though it's very well played, it feels a little bit standard and no frills to me. Like, this is metal. This is definitely factors in well to the release, but I'd say isn't too interesting to me. Like, I listen to a lot of metal, so this is this standard definition prototypical playing of metal. But there are some good riffs here, a few nice solos, so I like that. Overall, I'd say it's an exciting release. Some of the songs here are so catchy to me, so yeah, I'll go more into it later, but overall I'd say, even though it's a little try hard at parts, you actually would want it to be that. I definitely wouldn't want something as changing in her career as this to not be tried really hard, so definitely happy with this release from her. A different change of direction from the stuff I was previously aware of.
Cool. Cam?
Yeah, so I've been aware of Poppy for a few years now, but I haven't really kept up with her. So when I heard that she was doing a metal album or a metal adjacent album, whatever you want to call it, I wasn't sure how it would turn out at first, but I'm really happy that this turned out shockingly well. 100% fits in with the whole Poppy brand and character in ways that I didn't even expect. Like you said at the beginning, Ed, the whole thing about her is like being an artificial pop star. And so now this kind of both feels like an organic change in direction for the artist behind Poppy and for the character of Poppy herself into this kind of quasi parody of metal, new metal, whatever you want to call it. It incorporates all kinds of elements that are like on the more obvious to point out. Like the first track has strong elements of baby metal, and I've never listened to Slipknot myself, but other people are saying there's a lot of Slipknot influence here. She's touched on things like the Beach Boys and Depeche Mode for all this. So all of that just comes together for a really exciting release. But it's not like overtly aggressive the way like Slipknot or some other more extreme forms of metal are. And I think that's also part of it because it's like you've got Poppy, who may or may not be a robot trying to break out and do her own thing, possibly against the wills of her handlers or whatever the situation is in real life or in the story of Poppy. But like, I just find it hilarious that like this album has like no profanity on it. The whole thing is like she's rebelling in the most polite way possible, down to the frickin' title of the album being "I Disagree."
Yeah.
And you've got like the whole crazy exaggerated, obviously photoshopped art that it's just pitch perfect. This thing is like hilarious in all the right ways, but it also it takes itself seriously in every way it needs to.
Yeah, typically for a release like this, I'd say I'd be more inclined to love it if it really densely went into those narrative aspects. But that really isn't the point. The point is kind of that you're living through Poppy's narrative by listening to the music, and this just happens to be the music that she's making. It's not necessarily music that's constantly explicitly about telling a story. But having said that, there's a bunch of lyrics on here that I found really interesting that I wouldn't mind going into later. But to summarize my thoughts, this is definitely my favorite Poppy album so far. I wasn't sure how the metal and pop fusion type dealio that she's been going for since her last album was going to pan out especially well here. The only two tracks from her previous album, Am I a Girl, that explored this style were Play Destroy and X, and I did enjoy Play Destroy, mainly for the Grimes feature being pretty good. But the song X felt like the most outwardly, I guess, explicit attempt at ramming dream pop into, you know, more aggressive styles of music. And I wasn't really a fan of that track, but on I Disagree, the first like 4 or 5 singles all kind of fit this style of taking really heavy, aggressive metal music and kind of gracelessly ramming it into more sugary or ambient or electronic elements.
Yeah.
Honestly, the thing about the way this album fuses different genres together is they kind of rarely, if ever, overlap with each other. You're kind of going from one distinct section to the next a lot of the time. And I think that's led a lot of people to listen to this and kind of shut it down a little because it sort of just feels kind of kitschy in a way.
I like that though, because it's like she's decided which section, which pre-written section in the writing process or creative process, what exact genre was best for this piece of music. And yeah, I like that there's no overlap. It's definitely distinct parts of songs that are forced to coexist in the same track.
I mean, not every track here fits that template, which is maybe what the singles would have had us expect. But by the time you get to track 6 here, you're basically being greeted with some pretty typical dream pop type stuff, some indie pop on the track Nothing I Need.
Electronic influence elements in there as well. Some nice synth parts to that song.
And also the song Sick of the Sun towards the end is very much not an exercise in aggression at any point. It's a pretty chill song. I kind of wish, having said that, as much as I think those songs are pretty decent, I kind of wish she went all the way and made the entire album fit this template, because I kind of like the approach. I read an interview about her last album talking about the metal and pop fusion, and she said it was meant to be kind of indicative of the kind of whiplash mindset that you get from being a celebrity in modern times, having to constantly readjust yourself. And that kind of ties into how I see this album as kind of a second breakout for Poppy, or a second wind. Not only has she distanced herself from Titanic Sinclair, who was, you know, one of the main brains behind the project before this, but also it feels like she's really honed in what she was doing on tracks like X and Play Destroy, and she's made it kind of her entire brand, I'd say. I wouldn't be surprised if her next album also followed suit and was perhaps even more into this approach. But for now, this is way more successful than I expected it to be as an experiment. But it's also just a solid pop album. Like Alex said, this is kind of primarily a pop album, even though it largely incorporates elements of alternative metal and new metal. It's still pretty accessible.
Yeah, the instrumentation a lot of the time is metal, but it's the strong pop catchy melodies that are the things that stick with me hours after listening to it. I don't want to be down on the metal aspects. That's definitely a really welcome part of this, though. My favourite tracks on here were maybe Blood Money and Sit Stay. Well, other than Concrete, which is just a powerhouse, catchy melody, which I believe all three of us probably can't get enough of.
Yep.
Yeah, but I really like the dark themes of those songs, and definitely the weird musical sections in between the verses that are just whacked out, heavy electro-industrial sections that, honestly, on some tracks here, she's really going all in with the concept. Not the whole album, like Ed was saying, but definitely on a few tracks, definitely did. And I just want to say, the production as a whole and mixing on this release, really good. Nothing to fault there for me, especially the double tracking of vocals. As I've listened to this more and more, I've noticed but the double tracking of her own vocals, either sort of sweeter and more sinister tones, or there's like some cool black metal dudes or death metal dudes that a few times like co-sing with her. Like I definitely heard that on I think Fill the Crown and the title track a little bit. That's something I didn't notice immediately because I'm just getting swept away by the song itself. But as I listen more and more, I'm like, that's such a good little subtle undertone that like additionally helps it become more of a metal release to me, which is definitely something I appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, Alex is probably the resident metal enthusiast amongst us. I couldn't, really tell you any major specific frames of reference for this, but I guess it is worth noting that what Poppy is doing with the individual genres in isolation is not especially experimental, if we're going to be honest about it, but the real joy of this project is hearing how she goes from one style to another, I'd say. And that's why I was kind of let down by the fact that in the second half of the track listing, it doesn't have that going for it sometimes on a couple of tracks.
You mean like they're more straightforward and they don't jump around as much?
Yeah, which would be fine, but I'd say those tracks kind of pale in comparison to the just straight, electropop or synth pop tracks on her previous two records. So it's kind of jarring and noticeable in a way, and it kind of distracts from the major focus of this record for me. I think Sick of the Sun is kind of it's not an especially well-written song, honestly. But there's still things to like about those tracks, by all means. I just feel like I would have enjoyed this more if it had more focus.
Sick of the Sun is a really good guitar part, like slide guitar. I definitely think that works better in isolation from the album, though.
Cam, what were your favourites?
I'm pretty basic. I mostly gravitated toward the more poppy or or easily digestible songs on here. So, Concrete and I Disagree. And then I was trying to get into some of the songs like Fill the Crown. It might be the most cryptic song on the album, I think. I couldn't really get a sense of what that was, what it was trying to do or say, or how it fit into the, like, I don't know if you can even call it, like, story or arc or whatever of the album.
That song, it took me at least 3 or 4 listens to even catch what the chorus lyrics were saying. Like, fill the crown, make sure we're all fed, something like that. And I'm like, I didn't even catch that. I had no idea what that was saying, so I definitely agree that's one of the more cryptic songs on here.
I mean, that vocal in particular sounds pretty chopped up to me. It doesn't sound like she's saying what it says she's saying in the lyrics, but
yeah.
I thought
it could be.
Yeah, I thought that section of the song kind of made that track feel kind of jumbled overall. I'd say Fill the Crown is one of the least successful attempts at mashing together multiple genres and taking this winding road through them. the
Yeah.
hook is definitely one of the weakest on the record. It just feels kind of empty to me.
That's my least favorite part of that song, the hook, but I definitely
Yeah.
love other. That's the thing, all the different segments or sections of songs. It's definitely part. Like, I think Phil the Crown actually has maybe
Oh,
the best guitar riff on the whole album.
it has some really good sections, don't get me wrong. It just ends up feeling kind of like a mess of multiple different song ideas. But
Definitely feels like a mess, but like I say,
mm,
I think definitely one of the best guitar riffs on the album because it just comes out of nowhere, ramps up, gets gets me going. I didn't jump out to me immediately, but the song "Bite Your Teeth" is actually like one of the better, mostly heavy songs. But even that one like ends in a weird like string section ending,
yeah.
which is weird. And then the album never really gets truly heavy again. Like I guess "Don't Go Outside" has a couple of really good crescendoing guitar riffs in the instrumental section, but that's just indicative of progressive rock more than metal to me. So
I agree. I'd say
yeah,
Don't Go Outside is definitely one of the most ambitious tracks on here. I really enjoy how at the end of that track, Poppy brings back a bunch of hooks from previous songs on the album. Definitely all of the most catchy hooks, I'd say, on tracks like I Disagree, Blood Money, Concrete.
makes you want to listen to the whole album again.
Yeah, she kind of really tightly, cohesively ties it all together in a nice bow at the end, and I really enjoy that. It kind of reminds me of that Butch Lullaby song from the Sunkel Moon album we reviewed a few years ago. Jesus, a few
Damn,
years ago.
damn flashback time.
Yeah. I just like how the vocals loop and how they're integrated into what is definitely a different key to the original tracks. It's really cool and definitely a memorable way to end the album.
What do you guys think the theme of the album is?
I mean, I get general undertones from this album. I wouldn't say it's incredibly concise in terms of presenting an overall theme, but obviously from the title of the album, I Disagree, it's meant to be this action of defiance, I guess, which is certainly how I read it. I kind of read it also as a kind of statement on what the Poppy brand is essentially being shoehorned into at this point. I've seen a lot of people say about
Yeah.
this record that it kind of filters Poppy's original gimmick through the new approach that she's found with the metal influences. And I'm not entirely sure if I'd agree with that. If it has been filtered through, it's definitely not as on the nose as it has been in the past. I'd say Poppy's more focused on making kind of fairly vague songs that occasionally will have a lyric that stands out and makes you think, oh, what's this about? Because I couldn't help thinking about the Titanic Sinclair situation when I listened to this album. And I don't know if I'm just projecting there because, like I said, a lot of the lyrics are so vague that you don't really know exactly what she's talking about.
You say that, but the actual song "I Disagree" is the only one that I feel like could, even though it's kind of vague, specifically speak to that.
Hmm. Another thing worth noting about that track is that it also has Japanese lyrics at the start, sung by Poppy herself.
Yeah, definitely speaks to the baby metal comparison that Cam was saying at the start.
Yeah.
Just as a little side note, I just want to commend the key change that Concrete goes through
yeah.
at the last like 50 seconds.
That outro is great.
It almost sounds like late 90s teen pop, the melody, to me. Maybe the best part of the whole album.
I definitely love the song Blood Money the most out of these. It's not only the most kind of outwardly aggressive track, but it also has some really cool incorporations of kind of EDM breakdowns, but with still keeping the metal style.
Yeah, like industrial metal.
Yeah, it's super industrial. It's kind of crazy and in your face, but very enjoyable. A lot of people don't like the from Jesus to Christ lyric. I think it's fine.
So Ed was saying that he filters the album through the lens of the whole Titanic Sinclair situation, which is, it's valid in hindsight, whether or not it's actually how the album, quote unquote, should be interpreted. I don't think really matters, but for me, I can't help but view it through the lens of the whole Poppy persona and the character and what possible arc that whole story, if you want to call it a story, might be taking. So to me, the album kind of feels like it's the struggle between who Poppy is and who Poppy wants to be, is starting to become, or is trying to be. So it seems like there might be something to that in the way it alternates sometimes between the metal and the pop. Like the pop might be older Poppy, and the metal might be the new Poppy trying to like force her way out, but she's like still a programmed robot, so she doesn't really know how to do it without being, sweet and polite, like with I Disagree. If I was better at media analysis, I might be able to say more about that. And then, that kind of got confirmed for me when I was looking into Bite Your Teeth, because I was just like, it's the most repetitive song on the album, hands down, in terms of lyrics. And then probably the melody comes along with that. And then I looked it up, and the title in the main line, Bite Your Own Teeth, is from a quote from Alan Watts, who is like the father of Zen in the Western world. And he like brought Zen philosophy to Western audiences. And so I'm like, it's one of the more thoroughly aggressive songs on the album. And, Bite Your Teeth kind of sounds like the sort of thing that a metal band might say as like some kind of weird body horror threat or something like that. But the actual quote from Watts is, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. So it's like if Poppy is saying, bite your own teeth, don't cry, just bite your own teeth, all that, it actually kind of becomes the most optimistic song on the album in a way. Because it's like saying you need to try to define yourself.
Yeah.
It's hard to do, but you can do it, and it needs to be done.
I mean, that kind of ties in with what I was saying about this being kind of a new breakout for Poppy, or, kind of a reinvention of her approach without really changing the character or the narrative in any way. I think Poppy is in a place of trying to define who she is and what path she's going to take, especially in light of recent, real world things happening. So that makes a lot of sense. There's also like a lot of points on the album where one lyric will essentially be told from one perspective while the other will be from the complete opposite perspective. So on Blood Money, there's a section where the lyrics are, what do you believe when everyone is watching, which obviously probably speaks to the celebrity aspect of Poppy. But then the outro says, what do you believe when no one is around? And to me that speaks to perhaps, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but the person behind Poppy, the one playing the character, essentially is a complete unknown to everyone on the internet, at least.
Yeah.
So I felt like that was kind of her acknowledging the two sides of her very interesting situation that she's found herself in.
I feel like I'm slacking a bit on factoring the Poppy persona explicitly into the musical and lyrical themes.
Yeah.
That's definitely valid and definitely something I should do because it is Poppy. I'm just here for the music, I think. Like, when I first heard that, when she was known as just that Poppy, the song Low Life, that could have been just by anyone, so it's definitely true she's factoring more of the persona into the music more now, and this is like redefining it in some ways.
That's a way better way of putting it than what I was trying to say. It's very much a redefinition.
Yeah, I feel like this is just a legitimate musician now. Like, I've never even really followed the YouTube, artificial intelligent persona. I feel like what I just said there confirms that. The videos weren't really equatable to anything I was enjoying. They seemed definitely interesting, but definitely probably beyond what I could understand she was going for in a way.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that this exists now, and I don't even know if she still uploads videos like that now, though. I doubt it, but I don't know.
I actually have no idea, and I haven't been following Poppy's YouTube channel by any means. I kind of just have heard about the approach of the project, but like honestly, I'm more invested in her as a musician, like you say.
Yeah,
at this point.
Like this, she's actually going to be touring around my country in a few months. Like legitimate like metal hard rock venues,
Hmm.
which is pretty cool considering that this is a newly developed fin for her.
I'd say definitely Poppy's found her own sound with this album, even if the individual things that she's doing are not necessarily wholly new or original, and that's definitely something worth celebrating.
For sure.
Having said that, shall we go into ratings and conclusions?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
Take it away, Cam.
I'm going to give this a soft 8 out of 10. I think that the genre blending works really well. It helps that, I wasn't expecting it to work. I do think that maybe it could have been more clear if any of the stuff that I thought about this album was actually true, like if it was actually supposed to be, the old Poppy fighting against the new Poppy. But at the same time, I think the vagueness works to some degree, and there's also, like, you could say maybe the lyrics are a little too generic for its own good, but I also think that that fits into the character, so it really depends on how much weight you're willing to give that side of the whole Poppy phenomenon. So if you're open to it, I think you're really going to like this album. If you think it's just a total waste of time, then you're probably going to think that the album is just kid stuff, disastrous, bad genre mixing. But for me, being aware, at least to some degree, of Poppy and what the whole Poppy brand is about, it worked for me, and that's the important thing.
Alex?
Okay, I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. Really liked it a lot. The idea of combining metal and what I previously assumed, or in a dated way from her very first pieces of music, knew of Poppy's pop music. The idea seemed pretty cool, and it was largely met. The metal aspects of this are executed pretty decently and competently, and it rips quite a bit at a lot of points. Hooks for days, choruses that I think will last me the rest of the month in my head. I wouldn't be averse if she explored this musical sound a bit further, although based on her musical progression so far, I wouldn't count on it, but I'd be happy with it. But I'm also interested to just hear what else she has to do, and I'm interested in going back and hearing her other stuff. So, yeah, I'm really happy with this. 7 out of 10. Enjoyed it quite a bit.
So, as Alex said, it's really hard to say whether Poppy's going to continue down this path, whether she's kind of found her truest approach at this point, or whether she's going to do something completely different next time around. But compared to the attempts at fusing metal and pop on her previous album, I'd say this is much better than I expected it to be. I still don't quite love this album. I think the elements of kitsch kind of do hold it back a little bit, and you do kind of get the sense that you are listening to novelty music at times, only in the sense of how some individual sections don't do a lot on their own. They kind of only work as a functioning part of a greater machine. That is the full track. But then, like we said, on tracks like Fill the Crown, it kind of becomes a bit too jumbled to really process as one full, cohesive song. Having said that, I do really enjoy a great deal of the material on here. It definitely rips in places. The mixing is very good. Poppy's performance is on point, as usual. The hooks on some of these tracks are really good. The hook on I Disagree has been firmly stuck in my head since I first heard that track last year, which is definitely a good sign. And I'm just really excited to see what Poppy does next, even if I didn't quite love this album. So I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10, maybe leaning on a 7 possibly on repeat listens, because I've only heard this 3 or 4 times at this point. So thanks for listening to this episode of Busted Speakers. We hope you enjoyed this discussion of Poppy's new album, and bye for now.
See you guys.
Bye.